Hello, everyone. So, the SEL skill I have chosen today for my presentation is going to be emotion regulation. And we're going to be looking at this specifically within fifth grade students. Now, I chose this because I feel like fifth grade is like the time where students are on the edge of being dependent and also independent. And during this time, they're having a lot of different situations they're having to navigate, like making new friends, dealing with just different group projects and things of that nature. But during this time, this is where they'll kind of learn how to really regulate their emotions and respond in a way that is more positive. Now, during this presentation, I will be going through what is emotion regulation. I will also be introducing a classroom activity, talking about how to implement this activity, what type of accommodations and modifications we can give for this activity, and then also just how to reinforce this skill, and then I'll share our references at the end. So first, let's get into emotion regulation. So emotion regulation is the ability to recognize emotions, understand what may be causing them, and also manage how we respond. Now, this doesn't mean that students should just ignore their feelings or that they always have to be calm. The goal of this is for students to be able to experience an emotion without automatically reacting to it. For example, let's say a fifth grader, might be frustrated because an assignment is difficult or embarrassed about getting an answer wrong or just angry during, a fight with a friend. The whole point of emotion regulation is to help them pause and decide what to do instead of immediately giving up, yelling, or reacting in a way that just makes the situation worse. Now, for our classroom activity, the one I chose is called Regulation Reset. Now, the goal of this is to give students a simple process they can remember when they experience a strong emotion. The first step of this is going to be notice. This is where students identify what they're feeling. Next is pause. This is so they don't immediately, react. Then they process what happened and why they may be feeling that way. After that, they choose a strategy that could help them, like talking to a friend or taking a few slow breaths or using positive self-talk or even asking for help. And finally, once they feel better, they can respond. Now, to practice, students would work with scenario cards. For example, a card might say that they studied really hard for a test but received a lower grade than they expected. Students will identify how they might feel and then walk through the regulation reset to decide how they could handle the situation. Now, for the initial lesson, I will plan for it to be around 20 to 25 minutes and then offer, a short 2 to 3 minute follow-up practices during the week. Now, I would start with a short explanation of emotion regulation, and then I would model the regulation reset myself using a situation that fifth graders could relate to. Now, after we model this, students would spend around 8 minutes practicing different scenarios with a partner. Then they would come back together and talk about some of the strategies students chose. I would also end it with a quick reflection where students can identify one regulation strategy that they think could work for them. Now, the materials are also very simple. All they would need is like scenario cards, an emotion chart, a list of regulation strategies, and then they can also have a pencil or like a mini whiteboard to use as well. I also wouldn't teach this once and expect students to automatically use it. So like that's where the short 2 to 3 minute follow-up practices come during the week. That will kind of help, just reinforce what they learned. And then obviously the overall goal is that students should be able to identify an emotion and independently select at least one appropriate regulation strategy. Now, when thinking about this, it's also very important that the activity is accessible to different students. Some students may have difficulty identifying or explaining emotions, so visual emotion cards or icons, could be a good help. And then scenarios could also be read aloud for students who need reading support. And sentence starters can make it easier for students, just to explain their thinking and explain how they're feeling. Students also wouldn't have to respond in only one way. They could speak, write, or even draw their response depending on what works best for them because we're all different, very different learners. Um, for participation, students could work with a partner or independently if they're more comfortable that way. And I would also use a variety of scenarios involving things like friendships, sports, schoolwork, games, and even group projects. So students have different situations they can connect with, and just to kind of give more of like a open variety for them. Now, most importantly though, students would never be required to share a personal emotional experience. They can learn the skill using fictional examples. So it doesn't have to tie directly to them, but they can learn using ones that don't fully connect. Now, one lesson by itself probably isn't going to make, emotional or emotion regulation become a habit. So like reinforcement is one of the most important keys to this. And one simple way teachers can do this is by using the same short reminder whenever a student is becoming frustrated. For example, pause. What strategy could help right now? That simple reminder could be used different during difficult assignments, group work, transitions, peer conflict, or even things like recess and lunch. Um, Adults can also model emotion regulation themselves. For example, a teacher might say, I'm feeling frustrated because our technology isn't working. So I'm going to pause for a second before I try again. This kind of like thing will show students that adults experience strong emotions too, and just demonstrates what healthy regulation actually looks like. Um, it would also help, or it would also, be helpful for counselors, aides, recess staff, and like other people who are in faculty to use similar language. Um, just so students can understand like it's not just them going through it, and I feel like throughout our course, this summer, the material is really emphasized that students are more likely to generalize an SEL skill when they practice it across different people, settings, and situations. So with that, it's very important that they get the variety for this. Okay, and these are going to be the main resources that I use for this presentation. Um, I just want to say thank you for listening, and hopefully you learned something new today. Thank you.